Programmers Life once again. How are you doing? So we are back into our programming sessions. Remember, we had specified the language that we want to work with. So for those of you who are just watching this episode, I'm hopeful that you have watched the earlier episodes. So just a review of where we ended last time. We had introduced the language, we had talked about its features, we had talked about its specifications, we had talked about the different ways of programming or methodologies that we can use in the language. Then we had even outlined the layout of a C++ program. We had also specified some of the language syntax, and we had promised that those were a few more were yet to come as we go deep into the language. Then most of them still were outlined but were not explained. Then we promised that along the way each of the syntax will make sense. So in the next bit for this evening session, we are going to try to look at a basic C++ program. So here it means we have started actual programming. So what I'm going to do, I will be interacting between the real compiler and handling the text editor. Remember, if you had watched the previous episodes, we said we can have as many compilers as possible on the machine, and by the way, it is advisable that you have more than one compiler. Reason being, some language specifications dictate that you should be using a certain version of the compiler, and another version might not be handling the language specification that you might be having. So right now I'm in Sublime, one of my favorite text editors, and that is where I'm going to be typing my first code. Now again, as a reminder, previously we interacted with quite a number of text editors, and Sublime was among them. Then we had VS Code, then we had Notepad++. So I showed you how you can work with any of those text editors, but for this case we are going to be moving around using Sublime, and we shall be using our compiler. Now I have dev C++ version 5.11 that is already installed here. Don't mind about what is here, we shall try to have our own at a later bit. So you can also be having dev, or you can be having any other compiler. Still to remember, I told you that some compilers come with their own text editors. So this is one of them. Dev comes with its own text editor. You can erase type, you can reconfigure, you can change things here and there, just to create a comfortable environment for your programming sessions. So for me, I already have this, but of course in the future we shall be using other types of compilers or other examples of compilers, and we shall see how life treats us in them. So here we are back to Sublime. So we said when you are in a text editor like Sublime, what do? You go to view, then you say syntax, then you say C++. So what we are going to have right here is a basic C++ program. It's just going to help us to understand some of the core elements at the beginning bit. So here we shall have IOStream, then we shall have using namespace standard. Then down here we shall say int main. So inside here shall say cout hey no, hey, I wanna be a programmer. Okay, so shall say that end line. Oh yeah, so we have our first basic C++ program. Now I know someone is already asking, what exactly are you writing? What is it really that I'm seeing on screen? So that's what we are going to do next. So down here, but before that, now what we are looking at right here, up there, we are having lines. In programming we focus on what we call lines of code. So as I was typing, these lines were creating themselves around here. So basically I should say my program has 9 lines of code. So line 1 says a basic C++ program, line 2 says hash include IOStream, then line 3 says using namespace standard. Then we have line 4. Line 4, for starters, we are going to eliminate this and shall leave it empty for starters. Reason yet to be known in the future. Then we are having line 5, it has an opposite of itself on line 9. Then we are having line 6, then line 7 and line 8. Okay, now down here we shall say explanation. So we want to understand exactly what was written up there. Now line 1 is known as a comment. Back to our previous session, we said the language supports comments. For those of you who looked through the previous episode that we had, we said the language supports comments, and now we are trying to know what comments are. So a comment is explanatory text for code readers. Okay, the purpose of a comment, or the purpose of comments in our programs, is to make them more clear, more understandable, more nice to remember. So what comments do, they help a programmer to explain what they have written. So comments are targeted for whoever is going to be reading your code. Not only you, but whoever will get access to your code will be able to use these comments. Now when it comes to a compiler, the compiler ignores any comment that you've written. So right now, assume I had just started from line 2. Would someone really know what I had written? It might be a little bit harder, but if you see line 1, it says a basic C++ program. So definitely if someone is trying to read your code, then they will know, okay, this is a basic C++ program. So comments can be anything, but for as long as it makes sense to you and whoever is going to be reading the code. Now still about comments. Comments can be put in any section of the code. Reason, we have said they are ignored by the compiler. Then comments should be well organized within the code so that the code can also be clean and readable. Disorganized code is always hell for whoever is trying to really study the code. So it's advisable that if you're giving comments, please try to organize them, put them where you feel it is really necessary so that the code stays readable. Once again, we said in our previous session that the language supports 2 types of comments, that is single line and multi-line comments. Now if you try to notice, you'll ask yourself, line 1 is which type of a comment? That is what we call a single line comment. Okay, a single line comment. Reason, it only a single line of text. So the moment you press enter below and write something, so that something is totally not a comment. If you try to realize here in Sublime, comments are in faint color, but the moment you run out of the scope for that particular comment, like for this single line comment, then automatically it will cease to be a comment. Now, so we have a single line comment, then we have a multi-line comment. A multi-line comment is the one that we have on line 6. Okay, line 6 is a multi-line comment. Reason, it can affect more than one line of text. So if you try to notice line 6, I can break it down, and inside I can have as much as I wish. So what does it have? It has the opening, which is the forward slash and the asterisk, then the asterisk and the forward slash. That is why it's called a multi-line comment. Hopefully that is clear. So we shall be moving to line 2. Now line 2 is called a header file. Okay, it's called a header file, or where we have what we call library declarations. Okay, remember in our previous episode we said the language is library based. Then when we even talked about the skeleton of a C++ program or its layout, we said header files are always on the top, or we begin with header files, and we said they can be as many as possible. Shall witness that as we continue to write programs. Now, for now we have only a single header file. How do we know? Header files begin with a preprocessor directive. A preprocessor directive, and for this time around it's called hash define. So to note or to fix it right now, if you ever find any word that begins with a hash in C++, that word is given a term preprocessor directive. Okay, then what comes next is the library. Within the angle brackets, it's the library, which is called IO stream. IO means input, then output. So I is to the input, then O is to the output. Then we have a stream. We shall know what a stream is shortly from here. So line 2 is a header file or a library declaration. What does it do? The preprocessor directive, okay, the preprocessor directive, that is hash include commands the compiler to use the files in the library. Okay, so the hash include commands the compiler to use the files in the library. Now the library this time around is called IO stream. We said input output stream. So to someone who is wise, you've already noted that whenever we are writing programs, these programs encounter what we call input and output operations. So it means you're being given, or C++ provides with a library that will help you handle input and output. Now input in this case is the keyboard, then output is the screen or the monitor that is handling display. Okay, stream is a class, but we shall get to know the details as we move to the future. So in the next bit we need to know what's the purpose of line 2. We are saying line 2, the preprocessor directive commands the compiler to use the files in the library. Hope you're noting that. Okay, so line 2. Now line 2 says, line 3 says using the namespace standard. So we're going to try to explain that. Now, using is a keyword. Using is a keyword. The namespace is a keyword also. Using is a keyword. The namespace is a keyword also. Now, what do we call a keyword before we go any further? Now, a keyword is also known as a reserved word. A keyword is also known as a reserved word, and these are words that are already predefined in the language framework. Okay, and they are known to the compiler. Okay, so for anything, we shall be using that term along the way. So anything or a word that is already predefined in the language framework and is known to the compiler, then it is known as a keyword. Now, I'll begin with an example for us to understand. We said on line 2 we have a library, and this library is called IOStream. IOStream is handling input and output operations. Then we said a library is a collection of several files that will be used within the program. Now, an example is line 10. Line 10 is having a tool called cout. Okay, cout is helping to output to the screen. Now, cout is part of the IOStream library. Now, this is what happens. Each time you use a tool within a program, for example, I'm using cout and I'm saying I want the word, hey, I wanna be a programmer. Okay, hey, I wanna be a programmer. I want that word to be printed on the screen. So the first thing that the compiler will do, the compiler will check where is cout being defined in this scope. I mean, as a compiler, if I'm to use cout, how am I going to use it? So the usage or the functionality or the implementation of any tool that comes from a specific file, for example, that comes from a specific library, for example, the cout is coming from the IOStream, the compiler will need to know where was it defined from. Now, line 3 says using the namespace standard. In a layman's understanding, line 3 means that each time I use something, please, all its definitions are within here, are within this namespace. I don't know, guys, if it's really clear with you. The whole concept is, let me say, so when we run a program, I'll type it here so that we can have a reference. When we run a program to print, I'm giving an example, to print the statement that we had there, hey, blah blah blah. Okay, so our statement using namespace. Std means standard, okay, says or asks or commands, okay, commands or dictates if what you stated is defined in the current scope. So what does it mean? It means you are commanding the compiler to check if that tool that has been used within the program is already defined in that particular namespace standard. Okay, so what does it mean? The computer will desire to know where the definitions of that tool were defined. Okay, so that container that contains all the definitions of all the tools that are coming from a certain library are stored in what we call a namespace. Stored in what we call a namespace. So once again, to conclude on line 3, using namespace standard, in a layman it means that whatever I'm going to use, if you want to know how it's going to be used, if you want to know how it's going to be implemented, please check in the container called namespace. So namespace offers all the definitions for all the tools that are coming from the different libraries. So in the next bit we have line 4. Okay, now line 4 says int main, so we shall break it down for easier understanding. Now int, in the world of programming, more so C++, this is known as a data type, or it's known as a return type. Okay, we shall know why. Then this one is known as a function. Now I'll begin with a function. Now earlier on I told you that if you find any word that begins with a hash, it's called a preprocessor directive. Once again, if you find any word that ends with brackets, that ends with these brackets right here, any word that you can think of, but in its ending, if it's ending with these brackets, then it's known as a function. It's known as a function, or it's known as a method. So for this time around, we have a method, we have a function that is called main. Then when we are handling data in any program, every data should be having a specific type, and that is known as a data type. So we shall not go there right now, but the only thing that we can pick from line 4 is that we have what we call the main function. And what's the role of the main function? It's where program execution starts and ends. What does it mean? Without the main, execution seems impossible. Why? Because we've said the role of the main is where execution starts and ends. So what does it mean? It means that as a must, if you want the program to execute in the computer, then that program should always have a main function. I think that is very clear. Again, line 6 was already sorted. Then line 8 is saying cout. I'll type up here. Line 8 is saying cout. Now cout is known as an object, Don't ask me what an object is. It's an object of the IO stream. Is an object of the IO stream class. Okay, don't ask me what is an object, but basically what you need to understand here, it is pronounced as cout. Okay, what is it used to do? It is used to print or display is used to print or display content on the screen. Okay, it uses what we call the output stream operators. These are called output stream operators. By the way, they have their own specific name, a programming term, but we shall see it as we move forward. So we have what we call the output stream operators. So the cout object as part of the IO stream. Remember, we said IO means input output. Okay, so they allow you to print or to display content on the screen. Now, another thing that you need to note on line 8, you can have one output, or you can have one output object, cout, but with different output streams. For example, I had the first output stream which is saying, hey, I want to be a programmer. Then I have another output stream on the same line which says end line. Okay, actually I should talk about it. It means print a new line after display, so it allows to break to the next line after displaying. So it means end line, but if you notice, it is in its own output stream, and even the text that we want to display is also on its output stream. So in one output you can have as many streams as possible. Once again, if you notice, this line is terminated. I don't know if we had specified this. Yes, we did. We said in the syntax of the language, all statements must be terminated. What does it mean? It means that we already have about 3 statements. Of course, we are going to have an exclusive interaction about what we call statements, but briefly, how do I know that they are statements? Because they are terminated. So line 3 is a statement, line 8 is a statement, and line 9 is also a statement. Then we are having line 9. Line 9, it's an interesting line, but it's gonna be our first assignment in this episode, so please endeavor to look out for it. Then we're having line 5 and line 10. Line 5 and line 10, line 5 and 10. Line 5 and 10, it has what we call braces. Actually, they are called curly braces. They are called curly braces, and what do? They represent the start and end of a block of code. Okay, they represent the start and end of a block of code. So what does it mean? It means that this block of code begins from line 5 and it ends on line 10. So guys, what we are doing for now is trying to explain the different parts that we are seeing in a basic C++ program. Once again, in most cases, this is a must. Okay, in most cases this is a must. In most cases this is optional. Why should I say it's optional? You'll find other people saying it is a must buy, but I have my own opinion for line 3. Why would I say line 3 is optional in a program? Now here we are. If you remember what I said about a namespace, I said a namespace is a container that contains all definitions for all the tools that are being used in that particular scope from that specific library that was already mentioned earlier within the program. Now, right now, I gave an example of the IOStream library, and I'm saying in the IOStream library I'm extracting the cout tool or the file called cout. Why am I doing that? I want it to print for me the statement, hey, I wanna be a programmer. But at the time of execution, if the computer wants to know how cout has to be used or implemented in the program, then it has to run to the namespace, because that is where the definitions are. Now back again, if I say a namespace is a container of definitions, what does it mean? It means that when I say using the namespace standard, it means I'll be importing, I'll be bringing all the definitions of what I'm going to use and of what I'm not going to use. So it means, in quotes, in actual sense, I'll be overloading the program with definitions that I'm not going to use. I don't know if you're getting the concept. So that is why I'm saying, to me, it is optional. Now someone might ask, okay, when you say it is optional and you're saying an example of a file that is coming from the IOStream library, which is cout, requires definitions at the time of execution, where will the computer get the definitions from? That is the question. The answer is very simple and precise. Now, for those of you who are going to be reading around in different sources from different authors, you're going to find programs written in this form. Someone will be saying std, then using 2 full colons. Why do they do this? They do this because they have not imported the whole namespace standard. I don't know if you're getting the idea. We eliminate the std on line 8, reason being we imported the whole namespace standard. We imported the definitions of the namespace, we imported the definition of the cout through the namespace. You get the idea? So, but remember, we said when we import the namespace standard on line 3, we have brought in what we need or what we require and what we might not require. That is why I'm saying we are bringing a whole bunch of something that we are not going to exhaust in usage. So to eliminate, like I've said, it's optional. If you eliminate line 3, then you're going to opt for line 9. Okay, and these 2 full colons are called the scope resolution operators. Don't mind about that. We shall come to face them as we move. Scope resolution operators. Okay, so when I eliminate line 3, I'm going to opt for line 9. Otherwise, if I undo, if I'm to use line 3, then I'm going to opt for line 8. I think that is very clear. So it defends my idea of saying the line is optional, but to some people, of course, it is a must. Then still, again, once again, line 4 is a must. Reason being, we said the main function, that is where program execution starts and ends. Okay, then to conclude on whatever we've said, that is the order. We begin with the library, then if we are to use the namespace, it follows next, then it follows with the main function. Don't forget to go back to the previous episode that we had and check out for the skeleton or the structure of a C++ program. So for this session, what were we doing? We wrote a basic C++ program. We gave an explanation, and more explanations will be coming along the way. I left with an assignment of looking out for line 10. Was it line 10? But what does this line mean? That is what we left out. Okay, so I sign out. Still Programmers Live in this session.